Today, I'd like to address very the basics of maritime law or admiralty law, and just the procedural aspects and certain nuances of how you apply for an arrest, what should you look at, and what how the law has developed in India. I'll begin with a brief historical background leading up to the Admiralty Act of 2017, and then deal with the act briefly, and then proceed to conclude with the procedural aspects on how to arrest a vessel and what are the peculiarities of the admiralty jurisdiction, which is very fascinating because it is it is quite counterintuitive because it is based completely on civil law concepts rather than common law concepts that we are used to from which we have derived from English law. But to begin with the historical background of this law is that it began in UK as a borrowed concept from continental Europe. In continental Europe, they have a procedure which still exists where you can attach any property of a person against whom you have a claim. So the UK borrowed this, or England rather, borrowed this procedure in around into the 13th and 14th century, and they established something called an admiralty court under the aegis of the admiral. Now, this initially was done for the purpose of getting a person to appear in the court. So when a person was refusing to appear in court, they would attach his property, any property. It didn't have to be a ship. They could attach any property whatsoever, so that the person would then appear, or they could even arrest a person. Eventually, there seems to have been a conflict between this admiralty court, which was based on civil law principles, and the common law courts, which were jealously guarding their own jurisdiction, which was being eroded by the admiralty court. So at some point, the courts, the common law courts, started issuing writs of prohibition against against the admiralty court, and that whittled down the jurisdiction of the admiralty court. So whereas initially the admiralty court would arrest or attach property or arrest a person for all maritime claims, eventually, because of the writs of prohibition issued by the common law courts, the jurisdiction was then whittled down to certain minimum claims, such as damage caused by a ship, wages, something called bottomry, and which is a way of financing a voyage, which is archaic and doesn't really apply now. So these were like 4 or 5 claims. I'll just elaborate on those 5 claims. Just one second. Yeah, they were wrecks, damages, collision, salvage, possession of ships, bottomry, and seamen's wages. So what was initially a jurisdiction which was very broad, relating to all maritime transactions, turned into these 4 or 5 claims. And these claims were to be attached to the particular ship. So you had something called a maritime lien, which attached to a particular ship. Now, once the jurisdiction had been whittled down to such an extent, the admiralty practice had obviously become very limited. And in the 1830s, it was almost a dying court till a new act was enacted in England in 1840, which once again expanded the jurisdiction. And in the meantime, in 1823, for the first time, an admiralty court was established in India. This was done by the English using letters patent, where they established supreme courts in Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. And these courts were given admiralty jurisdiction equivalent to what was there in England. Pursuant to the 1840 Act, which expanded the admiralty jurisdiction, even these courts which were established in India had the same jurisdiction as the English courts. The jurisdiction was then further expanded by an 1861 Act, which was also applicable to India, and then by an 1890 Act passed by the English legislature, which basically made all high courts in India have jurisdiction equivalent to the courts in the United Kingdom. So the Admiralty jurisdiction that we have today is clearly a creation of the British, and we have inherited most of the laws initially from them. After the 1890 Act, there were no further legislation in India. Then when we got independence in 1947, as per the Constitution, the laws which were existing prior to independence continued to apply as long as they were not violative of the Constitution or were not repealed by any particular provision in the Constitution. So our laws stood frozen in 1890 and continued, and that position continued till the early 90s. So after a century, in the early 90s, the Supreme Court had a case before it called MV Elizabeth, in which the issue of the jurisdiction of the court of Andhra Pradesh, High Court of Andhra Pradesh, came into consideration. And in that case, while dealing with whether the Andhra Pradesh High Court had admiralty jurisdiction, which the Supreme Court held it had because it inherited its jurisdiction from the Madras High Court, which had derived admiralty jurisdiction under the latest patent, etc. The Supreme Court also went on to expound what admiralty law meant in India. At that point, the Supreme Court, after looking at the various legislations that had taken place in the United Kingdom, in America, and international conventions, concluded that the high courts in India should not only look at the old acts, but also look at the development in the law that has taken place after independence, in particular the 1952 Arrest Convention, and incorporated that Arrest Convention in the Indian law. So after Elizabeth, we were then governed by the 1952 Convention, in addition to the 1861 Admiralty Act. With this, the law then really took off, because for the first time, we had the concept of sistership arrest. We had additional claims which could be dealt as maritime claims. I will come to this. I will deal with maritime gains and maritime claims a little later. But basically, from the 1990s, the jurisdiction of the Admiralty courts in India stood expanded. Now, there's one peculiarity of the Admiralty law in India till very recently, was that there were the courts of Bombay, Calcutta, and Chennai exercised jurisdiction over the entire coast of India. So in Bombay, you could arrest a ship coming in to a port in Vizag or to a port somewhere in Kerala. You could arrest any vessel coming into India, no matter whether it was in Maharashtra or whether it was in Orissa or whether it was in any part of India. So the jurisdiction was not limited in that sense. There was subject matter jurisdiction depending on the nature of the claim and the entire coast of India. This position continued till 2017, when the Parliament passed the Admiralty Act of 2017. The Admiralty Jurisdiction and Settlement of Maritime Claims Act 2017 sought to consolidate the entire Admiralty law in India. And if you look at the Law Commission report, it took into consideration especially the judgment of Elizabeth the subsequent judgment in a court case called Liverpool C Success, which had incorporated a subsequent convention, the 99 Arrest Convention, into Indian law, and taking into account the best practices in the world and internationally, this act was enacted to consolidate the entire law in India. This act also repealed the initial 1861 Act and all other acts. And for the first time post-independence, India had a Admiralty Act. But contrary to the initial jurisdiction, sadly for us lawyers in Bombay, the territorial concept of territorial jurisdiction was introduced by this act. So now, compared to earlier where you could arrest a ship which came to any port in India, you can only arrest a ship which comes to the within the borders of Maharashtra. So now you have courts in Gujarat, in all the littoral states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala, etc. All of them have jurisdiction to arrest ships within their state boundaries, or rather their coasts. This act has also again taken into consideration all the international conventions, the claims that have been set out in those conventions, and listed out a broad set of maritime claims which can be proceeded against. Now, what has to be understood here is that initially, as I said, there were 5 or 6 claims which were in fact called maritime liens, which you could proceed against. Whilst first you could proceed against a person or property, it whittled down to the fact that you could only proceed against a particular ship for particular claims, such as seamen's wages, damages caused by a ship, collision, bottomry. Once we had these claims, you had to then proceed against a particular ship. You had to look for that ship which caused the damage, or that ship on which the person has served and his wages had not been paid, and move only to arrest that particular ship. Subsequently, with the 1952 convention, and even now in our 2017 act, the law was liberalized to the extent that not only can you arrest a particular ship, but you can also arrest a ship that is owned by the same person who owned the original ship. So, for example, if I have a claim against a person A with respect to service provided on a vessel owned by person A, I can arrest that particular ship, or I can arrest any other ship owned by person A. Now, once that facet has come into play, it has again increased the jurisdiction, the ability to arrest vessels. And this concept in India obviously came into, even though this was introduced in the 1956 convention, sorry, in India it only came into play after Elizabeth. So now the jurisdiction given by the 2017 Act is basically a consolidation of all the acts and all the conventions that have taken place before us. In this respect, we look at section 4 of the Act, which lists out the various maritime claims. Now, maritime claims, there are many maritime claims, and some of these maritime claims or also give rise to the original maritime liens. Now, the difference between a maritime claim and a maritime lien is that whereas a maritime claim can be exercised by filing a suit and will extinguish if there's change of ownership of a vessel, a maritime lien is a special kind of charge on a vessel which will attach to it. So, whereas if I have a claim for wages or loss or damage caused by an operation of a vessel, I will be able to arrest that vessel even if the owner sells it to a new person. But if I have a maritime claim, which is, for example, I have supplied fuel to the vessel, which only will give rise to a maritime claim, goods, materials, whatever, I can only arrest that vessel until it is owned by the same person. And subsequently, I can also arrest another vessel owned by the same person. So ownership becomes a very important criteria for maritime claim, whereas for maritime lien, ownership is not an issue. So once these developments have taken place, the courts in India have, I'll just show, well, we can look at section 5, which defines how the arrest can be done. Now, if you read the title of the section, it says arrest of vessel in rem. Now, this again is a peculiar concept in Admiralty, which relates to the fact that you proceed against a vessel and not against the person initially. And with this in mind, the action that you take in an Admiralty proceeding will be against the vessel. The in personam claim can also be made, but then the person against whom you are making the claim has to be subject to the jurisdiction of the court. So with these developments, today we have a situation where you can arrest any vessel which comes to India for a claim that has arisen anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter that the claim has to be related to in India in any manner. No, it has to be a maritime claim, which is defined in the Act, or a maritime lien. But it is not necessary that the claim has arisen in India. And that is the fascinating part. Like, you have to understand that these ships are moving around the world all the time. It is impossible for a person to chase a ship to different parts of the world because of the very peripatetic nature of shipping. And that's why you have this unique and unique manner of exercising this jurisdiction, which is based on subject matter and not on geographical geography as to where the cause of action arises. So if a ship was in the ports in Dubai and it is owned by someone living in America, but at Dubai she supplied fuel, which is called bunkers in shipping parlance, and the ship owner, who is an American, refuses to pay for that, the ship can be arrested in Dubai. But if the ship leaves the port in Dubai and comes to Mumbai, the ship can be arrested for failure to pay money that was due in Dubai for a cause of action that arose in Dubai with respect to our owner who is in America. So this is the unique feature of the jurisdiction, where it is exercised purely based on the claim and not on where the cause of action arose. The only two things are required are that the vessel has to be in India and within jurisdiction of the court, and that the claim has to be a maritime claim as defined by the Act. And frankly, this is the most intriguing part of this jurisdiction, because many times when you're working on a case, you in your mind you're traveling to all these fantastic places, because you will read that the ship is registered in Vanuatu or even Mongolia, which is a landlocked country, but the cause of action arose in some atoll in some random place in the Pacific Ocean, and you are sitting here in Bombay and arresting a ship for a cause of action that is absolutely in no way connected to you or your city. And it's a very fascinating, you know, part of this law that it's so international. And while you're sitting in Bombay, you're dealing with the world at large. And that for me is probably the most interesting part about maritime law, the international nature, the importance of it also, because you will also realize that once you start practicing this law, that some of the most important developments in law generally have taken place because of maritime cases. If you look at all the English law, the important English law that you follow, whether it be in arbitration or even contractual, it has all come out of maritime law because, let's face it, bulk of the trade in the world takes place through ships. If there are so many ships, thousands of ships, hundreds and thousands of ships plying every day, there are going to be disputes. And these disputes are of substantial amounts, which lead to parties fighting it to the death and creating all the most important case law. For example, you have something called a Mareva injunction, which seems like just an injunction, which is called now a freezing order, which actually developed purely out of Admiralty law. The issue there was that a person who had chartered, that is hired a vessel, owed money to the claimant. The claimant realized that the debtor had money in the United Kingdom. The debtor was from Indonesia. The ship was registered in Liberia, and the debtor had money in England. And based on that, an action was filed in England to attach monies lying there. And this is an amazing development because this takes back to the original maritime attachment, where you could attach the property of a person. The UK gave it up and now has found a circuitous way to come back to that original position in law. We don't have that in our acts. The UK now has the freezing injunction as a part of their law. So Admiralty law has developed over the ages and has come today as per this 2017 Act, which allows for something that is otherwise not common in Indian law, which would be akin to an attachment before judgment. Now, how do you exercise the jurisdiction of an Admiralty court? We have seen that first of all, it has to be with respect to certain claims. We have seen that it has to be with respect to certain, only with respect to ships, which come within the jurisdiction of the court. But how exactly and what is the procedure to arrest a ship? Now, first of all, one must look at the cause title in an Admiralty suit. You have your plaintiff, and this is generally how you define the defendant. MV XYZ, through her owners, managers, charterers, any person concerned or interested in her. It could be a foreign flag or an Indian ship, together with a so-and-so, presently lying at the port and harbor of any port, say Mumbai for this example. So when you're taking an action in REM, which we talked about earlier, you are taking an action against a thing, which is the vessel. You file a suit against the vessel and you give notice to all people interested in her, be her owners, be her managers, be her charterers, which means the people who have hired her, and you proceed solely against the vessel. Once you proceed against the vessel, you have to file the suit against the vessel when the vessel is within territorial jurisdiction of India. So when the vessel comes to India, or when you hear that a vessel is coming to India and you have a maritime claim against it, you can file a suit in the court within whose jurisdiction the vessel is about to come. And once you file the suit, this is a peculiarity of uh, this process, is that you can move ex parte to arrest the vessel. You don't have to give notice to any party. There are certain circumstances in which you will have to give a notice, but generally, as a rule, you don't have to give notice. You will move ex parte against the vessel. If you want, you can make the owner a party, but it is not necessary. When you move to arrest the vessel, you will have to make a prima facie case before the judge. For example, your case could be for, as I said, for supply of fuel to the ship while she was in Dubai. You will go to the judge saying that she has arrived in Bombay. She's within your jurisdiction. I had supplied her fuel on so and so day. The amount became due on so and so day. They have not paid, and I have written to them asking for payment. They have either admitted payment or they have denied payment. That is, it depends on the facts of the case. But once you show that supply has been made, invoices have been raised, and payments were due, you will get an arrest. Now, an arrest is basically detention of the vessel. So once a vessel has come into Bombay and she's arrested, the sheriff will then go and serve the arrest warrant on the vessel, and the vessel cannot leave India. Now, this is completely akin to, some would say, attachment before judgment. But look at the difference between the two. In an attachment before judgment, you would have to make out a very high case that the party is working to defeat your claim, is actively disposing of assets, etc. Whereas here, you simply come to court and say, I have a claim. Here are the documents to show that I have a claim, and you're entitled to an arrest. Once the vessel is arrested, and this is where it comes, the next step comes is that the owner of the vessel may choose to enter appearance in the court to defend the vessel, or he may choose to abandon the vessel. If he enters appearance to defend the vessel, then unless it's a maritime lien, it becomes a hybrid action of a in personam and an in rem action. So what have we achieved by this? We have today, in a maritime claim, filed a suit against a thing so as to coerce a owner who is in America to come and enter appearance in India and to subject himself or herself to Indian jurisdiction. So the entire act here is a question of obtaining jurisdiction by arresting the property of the owner. If the owner doesn't enter appearance, then you proceed against the vessel. If you have a good case, there'll be a decree passed in your favor and the vessel will be sold. In fact, the vessel can be sold even pending the suit because it just becomes very expensive to maintain a vessel. But that is with respect to a maritime claim. If I had a maritime lien, for example, instead of supplying bunkers to the vessel in Dubai, the vessel in Dubai had collided with my vessel and it was guilty for causing the accident, I could move the court in Bombay to arrest the vessel for damage caused to my ship. And when I move to arrest the vessel in Mumbai, I have something called a maritime lien, which are again defined in the act. And then I can attach the vessel irrespective of ownership. So even if after the accident, the American owner sold that vessel to someone in Russia, but the same vessel came to India, I can arrest her because I have a maritime lien. A maritime lien is something like a charge on the vessel, which attaches to the vessel the moment the incident occurred, that is when the accident occurred, when they collided, or in case of a seaman, the day he disembarked the vessel and his wages were not paid. And once it attaches to the vessel, it crystallizes the moment you arrest the ship, and it relates back to the date of the incident. Unlike a maritime claim, which I explained before, is that you get a right to arrest the vessel, but your claim on the vessel is secured on the date of the arrest of the vessel. But be that as it may, once you arrest the vessel, the owner in both cases can come and enter appearance and try to release the vessel by putting up any defense that he feels. Once the owner appears, then the suit will continue more or less like a normal suit. In case the vessel is sold, sometimes the owner doesn't have, the owner has the option either to put in security for my claim. For example, my bunker claim, where I supplied fuel to the vessel. I may have supplied fuel worth $500,000, and the vessel is worth $10 million. So the owner will come and put $5 million, which is with respect to my claim, and release the vessel. If he doesn't release the vessel stays in Bombay, and there are one or two options. The owner will fight it out and seek to release the vessel by showing that my claim is not legitimate, or at some point, the vessel will be sold by the court, and the monies will be deposited in court to the extent of my claim. The rest can either go to the owner or other claimants who might come in. So once the owner enters appearance, he either seeks release by fighting out the claim, by depositing money, or then if he doesn't have money, the vessel will be sold. This process then leads to another issue, is that when a vessel is normally arrested, it generally happens, and in my experience, it has happened in several cases, where if I have arrested a vessel, subsequently, many other claimants have come and arrested the same vessel. Now that leads to another peculiarity, is that when you have 10 people arresting a vessel for maritime claims, for example, how do you determine who gets what money? Now, that is a concept called priority. Again, this hierarchy has existed since time immemorial, that maritime liens have a hierarchy amongst themselves, which is actually defined in the Act itself. And for example, in Section 9, you have this, the claim for wages and other sums due to master, etc., come in first, then claim for loss of life, then claims for reward or salvage services, claims for port, canals, and statutory dues, and then claims based on damage caused by the operation of the vessel. So if I arrest the vessel for a collision, and a seaman then arrests the vessel for his wages that were due on the vessel, he will get priority over my dues when the vessel is sold and monies are to be dispersed. Subsequently, after the liens have been discharged, then you have the maritime claims. And then in maritime claims, the only issue is your ship mortgages will have a privilege over other maritime claims, and other maritime claims will then have to go pari passu. But the most important thing is the maritime lien will come first. Then there's a hierarchy in the maritime liens, and then we have the maritime claims. So this is the procedural aspect, where you file a proceeding against the ship. The ship is then arrested. Once the ship is arrested, the owner may enter appearance, or even any other person actually, as we put in the cost title. And once they enter appearance, they can choose either one, to fight out the arrest by saying that the claim is not maintainable for whatever reason. Two, to put security, release the vessel, and then fight out the claim. Or three, they might abandon the vessel, saying that we don't have money, the vessel will be sold. Now, let's go back to the claims, and I'll just like to discuss a couple of issues with respect to the most common sorts of claims that we have, and a couple of things that relate to these claims. For example, a very common claim is claim arising out of carriage of goods. Now, as ships are used mainly for trade, and with trade, we mean by carriage of goods from various countries, from one country to another. It could be cars, it could be mineral ore, it could be any kind of goods or equipment. When cargo of any nature is loaded onto a ship, you generally have the ship owner or the master of the ship issues a document called a bill of lading. The bill of lading is a document which evidences that cargo X has been loaded on the ship, and whoever then possesses the bill of lading has title to the goods. So if I am sending goods from India to Dubai, I load the goods on the ship. The bill of lading is issued to me, so I continue to be the owner of I continue to have title to the goods, and then on payment, I hand over the bill of lading to my counterparty in Dubai, who then, once on receiving that, gets the title of the goods and becomes entitled to receive the goods. Now, once you have bills of lading in question, you then have disputes regarding whether the bill of lading was issued properly, etc. And whenever you have claims for damages to goods that were carried on a ship, it will always be on who has the title and who is therefore entitled to sue for the damage, etc. The next important issue, and a word that you will hear very often, is charter party. That is an agreement relating to hire of a vessel. Now, charter parties are of many kinds. Actually, three, not three, several kinds. You have a voyage charter, you have a time charter, and you have something called a bareboat charter. The voyage charter is where a person will charter a vessel for a particular voyage. He can charter the entire vessel, or he can charter part of the vessel to carry his cargo from part A to part B. In this case, the owner will continue to be in control of the vessel, and you will only be entitled to put your goods on the vessel. The next is the time charter, which relates to a certain period of time for which the vessel is hired. So you can basically charter the vessel out for a month, year, 2 years, and it will be at the disposal of the charterer, but the owner will still continue to manage the vessel. So in a voyage charter, you only hire part of the vessel. In a time charter, you hire the entire vessel for a certain period of time. In a voyage charter, it could be part of the vessel or the entire vessel for a voyage. Time charters for a period of time. Then finally, you have the bareboat charter, which is a situation where you take over the vessel in its entirety for a certain period of time, where you become the de facto owner of the vessel. So if I take a vessel on a bareboat charter, the owner will hand over the vessel to me and say, you take this vessel, you engage your crew, you run the vessel as it is your vessel for a period of so many years, and only after that period you return it to me. So you become, for all practical purposes and even for in the law, the owner of the vessel for that period of time. So if the voyage, the bareboat charter for 5 years, 6 years, maybe 3 years, you are in full control of the vessel. You control where it goes, what she does, and you act as the owner. And then you can then subsequently, as the bareboat charterer, give her on time charter or voyage charter, or do however you want to feel to operate the vessel. A lot of disputes arise out of this because mainly, oftentimes, parties just run out of money. Now, these charter parties, these claims that arise under maritime law, as I've said, you can arrest the vessel against with respect to which the claim arose, or you can arrest any other vessel owned by the person against whom your claim lies. So you have now something called the second vessel is called a sister ship. So where, if my original example, I had supplied bunkers to a vessel in Dubai owned by a person in America, that vessel from Dubai never came to India, but another vessel owned by that person came to India, I would be entitled to arrest that vessel. Similarly, with this in mind, now what owners have started doing, and this is again a important development in the law, is that they have now what are called one ship companies. So a person will own many ships, but he will not own them through one company. He will own them through individual special purpose vehicles formed for each ship, called one ship companies. So the American owner, while he's the owner of the ship in Dubai, he's also the owner of a ship in the other ship which has come to India. But he will make a legal arrangement, which is legitimate in law, that the ownership is through a separate and independent company. So whereas the ship in Dubai was owned by a company called ABC Shipping, the company that owns the ship, the ship that is coming to India may be XYZ Shipping. And as you all know, in corporate law, companies are independent identities and you cannot arrest the ship. So this is a practical development that has taken place, where to avoid arrest of ships, now you have one ship companies, and even the biggest ship companies in the world will have this arrangement to avoid liability. So these are the basics of Admiralty law in India, and the jurisdiction that is exercised now by the courts. The concept of arrest of ships is that you can arrest the same ship, or you can arrest any ship owned by the person who was the owner of the original ship. So I mean, I'm trying to understand this. If a charterer, for example, let me put this way: if you had a claim against a charterer or a manager of a ship, in case of wages, as you're saying, now once it comes to wages, ownership of the ship becomes immaterial, of that particular ship. So if I had served on ship ABC and the charterer or manager has not paid me my salary, I can arrest that ship irrespective of who owns the ship, because I have something called a maritime lien. But if that ship is not within jurisdiction to arrest, I can arrest any other ship which is owned by the charterer or the manager. I hope that answers your question. You can look at Section 9 of the Act, which lists out the five maritime liens, uh, which are claim for wages and other sums due for service provided to the ship, claims in respect of loss of life or personal injury, claim for reward of salvage services, statutory dues, and loss or damage caused by the operation of the vessel. The simplest way to look at this is maritime liens are related to damage caused by the ship. So damage may be physical damage or damage to you because you were serving on the ship, etc. In priority, first of all, priorities will be determined based on maritime liens, mortgages, then claims. If maritime liens and mortgages get all the money, then subsequent maritime claims get nothing. So they have it's a similar thing, when you in company law, where you have priority for wages, or you used to have priority for wages of labor, that they get first, and then whatever remains is shared by everyone else. If the liens take the entire money for their claim, then nothing is left for anyone else. As long as the claim is a maritime claim, you can arrest the ship virtually anywhere in the world, as long as the ship is present in the jurisdiction of the court where you're arresting it. There is a book called Nigel Mason. He's the author. I'm forgetting the title of the book, but that is probably the best book on admiralty law that you can find. And if I'm not mistaken, it was being sold at a very heavy discount. The ebook was available on Amazon. I would recommend that you look at that book. It may be the book was originally for some 30,000-40,000, but the old edition ebook was available for 2,000 or 3,000 rupees. And that is frankly the book that all of us first refer to. There are quite a few firms. You have Bose and Mitra, Crawford Bailey, Bhatt and Saldana, and other law firms also do this kind of work. There are quite a few, but these are the more prominent ones. If the ship is arrested and abandoned, an application is made for sale of the ship, and the proceeds are then deposited in court. And once the proceeds are deposited in court, they represent the ship. And if anyone has a claim against that ship or the owner of that ship, they can proceed against the money that is deposited in court. Only the high courts have jurisdiction. The district courts do not have admiralty jurisdiction, as the Admiralty Act has created, has granted the jurisdiction to the high courts in the littoral states. So by littoral, I mean all the coastal states. So you, right from Bengal to Gujarat, all the high courts will have jurisdiction. The district courts will not have any jurisdiction. There is no entrance exam as such. Ideally, you should look for an internship in a law firm that does admiralty law, and then based on that, you will get the experience, and maybe you can move into that field. The liens take away the entire money, then your right is to arrest another vessel, or then to move against the owner in personam. So when the owner is in America, you could go to America and file a suit against him, or against any other vessel that is owned by him. I mean, that might happen. A lot of things happen in this world, but that's not the general rule. That there's the owners, threatening owners, I don't know. I have not come across this, but it may happen.
The question is on unmanned ship sailing.
Yeah. The unmanned ships, it will be an interesting issue as far as liability for damage, collisions, etc. goes, because it's going to be a whole different way of looking at who was at fault, etc. Then it becomes a question of technology. Right now, if you have a ship colliding with any other ship, you question the master, you look at the logs of the ship, you look at what the crew was doing on board. Now you can once it becomes unmanned, then it's a completely different ballgame. I mean, you're right. Things will have to be looked at in a very different way as to who's at fault, how the fault arose. See, what we have spoken about is only about the arrest of vessels. Uh, Customs clearing agents, etc. That is a separate issue altogether. Customs is related to shipping, and many times there'll be overlap. But customs and clearing agents are not the focus of the Admiralty Act. They may be in some way involved in a dispute, but not really as part of the Admiralty Act. There are other acts. You have your Customs Act, you have your Merchant Shipping Act. Under that, there may be some issues. Thank you for the opportunity. And I hope I'm helpful to all of you. And I sincerely hope that you will look into Admiralty law. It's a niche practice, but it's a very interesting practice. And don't look at it only from the viewpoint of practicing Admiralty law, but just learning something new, and these principles will be applicable to other jurisdictions also.